Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, Aircall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Ride Investments, Encore Business Group, JH Realty, and Williams Chiropractic.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant. We're here. We're on air. We're sorry about the technical difficulties. It's a holiday week. It's a little tougher with the holidays here. I think our intrepid owner Scott is coming in to help us out here. I've got to look at my notes, but I think it's National Cookie Exchange Day. I don't know, Nick. It's all baked goods here for this month. So. One of the things I want to do, because we're actually going to do a Christmas show, and one of the things I want to do for the Christmas show is holiday movies. So once we know your mic is working, why don't you test it, Nick? Why don't you say something into the mic here? We're going to test if people can hear you out there.
See, I wish I would have known that it was National Cookie Exchange Day, and I would have brought some cookies. Maybe, yeah, I would have brought some cookies. I probably wouldn't have been able to bake them.
Well, in case the audience didn't hear him, he was talking about bringing in cookies. That's the question I want to ask. So this will give you a chance to. It sounds like they can't hear you, Nick. So I'm going to have to filibuster here a little bit, but we'll hopefully get Nick on in the second segment. But what I want to do with the cookie exchange theme is have like what you would trade your cookie for. Like you get a whole set of cookies. You get a snickerdoodle, you get a sugar cookie, you get a chocolate chip, and then you have to exchange them. And what would you trade for what? Because I think that would be interesting. You know, you might have like a macaroon. That's an acquired taste. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe you don't want the snickerdoodle. So then, I'm hearing they can hear you out there, Nick. So we're gonna keep the conversation going. Apparently they could hear. So do you have a take on what you would trade?
What I would trade for?
Yeah, like what if you had the whole gamut of Christmas cookies? What would you trade?
I mean, I love a snickerdoodle.
What would you want to trade away? It's got to be strategic. What would you want to get rid of? Are there any that are like your least favorites?
Not a fan of the oatmeal raisin, right?
That's a good one to trade. Yeah.
That's the fake chocolate chip one, I feel. So it's always tricks you.
It's always disappointing when you get an oatmeal, because there's oatmeal chocolate chip. So when you get an oatmeal raisin, you're like, man, I wish this was a chocolate chip in this thing. I don't want to be having the oatmeal raisin. The other thing I want to do, because we're going to do a show on Christmas, and the other thing I want to do on Christmas is favorite Christmas movie. So here's my question to you, because I'm going to ask this to the producer, Aaron, who's producing on Christmas. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Because if it is, that's what I want to pick.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah.
It takes place at Christmas. It's very Christmas themed. So I feel like that's a good one. I mean, you could go with like an Elf, or there's some classics. You could go with A Christmas Story, or Miracle on 34th Street, or some of the older classics. Home Alone's obviously out there. But do you have a favorite Christmas movie, the go-to Christmas movie?
We only hear about Die Hard around Christmas time. It's always the controversy. Is it a Christmas movie? At that point, it has to be, because you don't ask on 4th of July. Is that a Christmas movie? I would have to say my favorite is going to be Charlie Brown Christmas.
That's a great one.
Yeah,
that's one of Mom's favorites. See, this is why you're one of Mom's favorite guests here. I told him that, Mom. Here, so he's missing you in studio, but we're excited to talk some puck here. We're hoping to get Brandon on for the second segment once we can actually get calls out. Otherwise, hey, it might be Nick and I just talking hockey. We got a lot of hockey to talk about here, Nick, because we've got we've got the Griffins and the Red Wings both playing really well. Here he is. Our owner has arrived.
Our savior.
I think we're on air here, Scott. So thankfully you've been hearing us, but I'm going to trade you seats here.
Please do.
Move over. I'm not sure if they were hearing me from here.
I don't think so.
from this mic. Is this mic on? There we go. Okay. That's this is what happens when you try to produce your own show. I'm fired from production here. We got Scott keeping us on track. He'll train me after the after this episode here. But yeah, thankfully since he's here, that means we'll probably get Brandon on for the second segment, and we'll finish this one up with Nick and I, because yeah, Nick, you've been chomping at the bit to get on the show because all you guys that cover the Griffins have been saying, hey, why are you covering so much Red Wings here? We got to get some Griffins on. They're off to literally the best start in AHL history.
Yeah, 90 years. This team has just gone on a crazy run. It's unbelievable each week that we get to talk about them, and we're running out of words to describe this team because it's literally just they just keep finding ways to win. It's been amazing. I've never seen a team this dominant from the beginning of the season till now. And I mean, nobody's ever seen this because it's the best in 90 years.
It's crazy to think about how this team kind of originated. I mean, they were playing pretty well last year, but now you're sending a couple guys down from the wings. You lost a couple good players. I mean, Danielson was a key player going into the season. Finney didn't really factor in, and now he's at the big leagues. We were talking about that before the show started. That's got to be one of the best storylines probably in hockey. I know it's our local market, but that's, I mean, a 7th round pick doing what he is on the main line, basically the first line there, and really filling in a big need for the Wings at the main level. I know he's got some things to clean up and he's a young guy, but he's playing pretty well.
Yeah, we were surprised. We were surprised that he got called up. It shocked us. We've seen him play in Grand Rapids first season, and he did look like he fit, and then we find out like he wasn't supposed to actually be playing with the Griffins that first season. At the end of the junior year, he was just there to kind of observe, taking the culture. Year 2, junior year ends, he comes to Grand Rapids, still kind of looks a little bit rough, right? Not polished, not ready, and then those boys put in some work over the summer, and it's been crazy. And when they got called up, we still are in disbelief that he's playing on the first line with Larkin and Raymond, and he's putting up points now.
What do you attribute that to? Were they training together in the summer? Where were they training in the off season?
They were training. Finney and ASP and Nate and MBN. They were all training together from what I remember, and they were trying to make it hard on Steve to be able to have him send him down to Grand Rapids. So they've they've stuck. That's the thing. Like, I thought Finney may got the 9 games and then been sent down, but he's made it stick. He's continued to put the work in, and the points will come.
He's ridden the waves well because he had that hot start that kept him up there, but then even though he took a little bit of a dip, he was still playing fairly well. Like you said, the points maybe just weren't there, but he was in the right spot a lot of the time. And even though he's pretty green, he's pretty new, his effort is maximum level, and that's what's helping to keep him at the main roster, I think. And then now they pulled up Leonard, which is nice. He was scoring very well for Grand Rapids. It was nice to see him get a call up, and he's been playing pretty well in the couple games he's been up.
I'm so stoked that John Leonard got the chance to play. He got the call up. He been on a tear in Grand Rapids. He is a veteran, so he's the veteran status with Grand Rapids. They are over the limit for veteran players, so they have to go through rotation. So some nights he has to sit. Shine has to sit. Gustafson, he has to sit. So they all kind of take their 1 game off and then play 2 games, and they kind of go through this rotation. And then he was leading the AHL in scoring. And then he gets the call up when Patrick Kane going out, and we're like, everybody in the Wings was like, this guy's been in the NHL before, he's played games, he hasn't been great, it's just whatever, it's just a guy. And we're like, hold up. Like, this guy is on a tear this year. It's a different John Leonard than years past. And what did he do this weekend? He put up 3 games, he put up 2 goals, 1 assist, and he created a lot of chances the first game. He just had to get used to the pace because it's a little bit faster in the NHL than the AHL. But he performed really well, and he's still not been sent back down, which the veterans here at Grand Rapids are happy because they get extra games to play.
Yeah, right sizes the teams a little bit, it sounds like. And, I mean, not all these guys develop at the same speed. I mean, Finney is a little bit ahead of schedule, I guess, for a 7th round pick. But Leonard, I mean, some of these guys this happens in hockey all the time. I feel like there's, who is it? The Red Wings played him earlier in the year, but there's a guy that has like 20 goals already, and he's playing really well, but he's got his high goal total for his entire career. You don't necessarily know how these guys are going to develop here. And so it's interesting stuff. So there's more to talk about with that. We'll try to get Brandon on the line. We now have a producer in-house here. We've got the executive producer. We had to make some calls and go straight to the top with straight to the middle, he says, with Scott Pasteur. So he's keeping us on track. So you're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM 6. So I appreciate you not being in studio here, Brandon, but how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you guys for having us. And I felt it was smart to not come in the studio when I'm feeling like this, but I'm here to talk Griffins and I'm excited to talk about them.
Yeah, well, Nick was basically saying, hey, where have you been? We've been trying to come on the show and talk some Griffins. They're off to this best start in the history of the 90-year AHL. But yeah, we got you guys here. We've got Elaine coming up later in the month here. We're going to have some more Griffins coverage because although it has been fun to cover the Red Wings in kind of a parody-driven NHL right now, I mean, we got to be talking about the Griffins because a lot of these guys, it's got to be fun for you guys to see the guys get called up from Grand Rapids to Detroit and play so well. We were talking about some of the guys that's happened with. Finney obviously was the big story at the beginning of the year. Now Leonard got called up and he seems to have found his form a little bit later in his career. It's got to be fun to see kind of one hand shaking the other here.
Yeah, it's extremely fun. It's, when we talk about this team every week, I'm starting to run out of words to describe what the Griffins are putting together and what they're doing and just the cast of characters they're doing it with. Every time they seem to lose a guy, the next man up mentality just comes through on this team and someone steps up and plays a role that's bigger than you ever thought they would. So it has been just unreal to watch what's happening. And it's been fun to see the crowds grow and the city getting behind it too. I think everyone's starting to realize that something special is brewing here in Grand Rapids.
Somebody was asking me, a family member was asking me at a Christmas party who to go see in the local market. And I'm like, you got to go see the Griffins. The environment's great, and you can't beat the historic start that they're off to. Plus, you're going to see guys that are making their way up to the main roster, or maybe even down from the main roster. That seems to be one of the changes that's really accelerated this team to a degree, is having a couple guys from that you maybe thought would make the main Detroit Red Wings roster and instead get sent down to Grand Rapids. They clear some space, and then you can send a Finney or a Danielson or a Leonard up because you've got a Hall or a Gustafson down in Grand Rapids. But I got to think that their leadership is helping this team down here.
Oh, yeah, 100%. The impact that Eric Gustafson, Justin Hall, and those guys are having on this team, the veteran leadership has just been unreal, especially when you think about, the AHL veteran rule. At, one point this season, we had 8 vets on this team. You have to sit 2 guys every night that are veterans. So there's a constant rotation of guys coming in and out. At one point in the season, they created their own rotation between the vets. They all kind of agreed that I'm going to sit this night, you're going to play the next night, and just showing these younger guys what it means to be a true pro. These kids are learning from some of the best, and then these vets are going out there and also producing. Like, I know Red Wings fans might not have the best, idea of Eric Gustafson with performance, but what he's been able to do in Grand Rapids has been unreal. I mean, last week at some point he had 8 points in 4 games as a defenseman. It's been absolutely unreal.
I think that's an underrated part of this. You're talking about the leadership even off the ice, because that was one thing that was interesting when I initially started talking with Shane Graham, who hosts the Thursday show with me. He was talking about when he coaches some of these young kickers, he takes them through even how to pack their bag for when they go on the road. And as simplistic as that sounds, it's like, well, we all travel and we know how to pack a bag. It's a little different when you're an athlete and you're trying to be prepared for these different situations, like prepare your stick a certain way, prepare your equipment a certain way, mentally prepare a certain way. These are all things that, although, like you said, they may not be the premier players from the Red Wings, and that's why they're down with the Griffins, they still have a lot of insights for the young guys.
Yeah, 100%. For them to be able to provide that insight and then also still go out on the ice and produce with them, it has to just teach them so much. Like, even just going back to Gus, 17 points in 17 games for him so far. Absolutely unreal season for him in the American League. You know, he's even bounced back and forth from playing a couple of games in Detroit this season. And one of the crazier parts when you look at those guys, too, is even the story that was shared earlier this season that him and Justin Holl were driving to Grand Rapids consistently to be playing. Like, they go home after a game, and then they come back for practice and go home, and they're still able to go out there and produce and show these kids how to be a pro.
They've been a key part. They're basically the link between these two right now. And then they clear up a couple spots for these young guys that we didn't necessarily anticipate being at that level. But Nick and I were talking about Finney before you jumped on, Brandon. But he's really been a revelation. And although he got off to that hot start and kind of dipped a little bit, he seems to be back to form, and he's really playing his way onto this team.
Yeah, Finney's a kid that I don't think any of us would have expected him to make the opening night roster, just with so much. He doesn't have that experience yet, but he did, and he's jumped in. And yeah, he had that little slump, but he's bounced back and doing all the right things. And that's all you can ask for a 7th round pick that's that young, getting thrust into the NHL like that. He's exceeded my expectations already.
Nick, who are some of the other guys that stick out to you from this roster so far? You've been watching a lot of the games. Who are some of the other guys that maybe people aren't talking about as much, but have been excelling here? Because it's got to be a long list with how well the team's playing.
It is a huge list. It's hard for us, like Brandon said, it's hard for us to come up with something new each week to talk about because they continue to win in a different. They continue to win. They continue to find a way to win. So it's hard to find like one guy to kind of single out, or because it's one night it's all the veterans are piling in the points, then the next night it's you get your 4th line, your 3rd line guy. I would say we call him Trail Mix, but he's a 3rd line guy, and he was at one point leading the AHL in goals, 4th. He was 4th in the league, and a guy that we signed over the summer, and he just came in and he's a veteran. Not, I would say veteran, but he is more experienced than most of the other guys, but not claiming that veteran status. And he's been able to really uplift the younger guys of Andre Becker and Jacob Ruklovsky, who were here last year, and they just kind of took their game to another level. So big fan of Trail Mix. He's funny post game as well. He's a hoot to be around. So that would be my forward that I would say is like, keep an eye on this guy.
Anybody whose nickname is Trail Mix, I'm on board. That's a good nickname. What about you, Brandon? I know you guys have kind of a hive mind to a degree, but is there anybody that you feel is sticking out to you here?
I mean, it's hard not to talk about the captain of the team in Dominic Shine. Just what he's been able to do offensively, and obviously with his leadership this year, has been just so cool to watch. And it's a guy that, as he's getting older, he seems to continue to get better. I mean, he hit a career high in points last year. Obviously one of the best stories in pro hockey, getting that first call up to the NHL and playing with the Detroit Red Wings. This year he's on pace to outpace those points last year. Like, he just continues to get better. And with that vet rule and some guys having to come out some nights, there's nights when he wouldn't be in the lineup, and the team played a little differently. And when he jumps back in that lineup, the team plays his identity. They play to his level, and he definitely sets the example for everybody to go out there and follow, and leads by example, and also can produce at such a high level. That top line, whether it's been him and Sheldon Dries and John Leonard, or you throw MBN in the mix, you throw any guy in that mix there. Even Andre Becker has been playing some first line nights. So, like, every guy's been able to rise to that first line and play to that level because they're surrounded by guys like him.
Obviously, he got a shot last year. Are there who do you think is going to be the most likely to get called up as the season goes on here? Do you think he'll get another shot? Obviously, they've got some young guys up there already playing, and Danielson and Finney, and some of the other folks they just called up Leonard. But do you have a couple names kind of on your short list, Brandon? And then I'll go to Nick on it.
Yeah, I mean, I can always say maybe Shine would get a call up, but who knows with that? Leonard getting a call up at his age. The best thing I love about this is when those guys get those calls. It shows these kids, or even guys that might be, in that 24 to 27-year-old range, that they still have that shot too. So any of them can do it, but I think what you'll see in Detroit, you'll probably see MBN back in Detroit at some point in time. He came down to Grand Rapids after not being able to find his offensive game in Detroit, has found it in Grand Rapids in an unreal way, and still producing that physical level as well, being able to throw the body, wear the other team out, cause chaos on the ice. I think it's only a matter of time before we see him back with the Red Wings.
What about you, Nick? Do you have any others that you either would like to see or would anticipate seeing at Red Wings level by the end of the season?
So I spend too much time with Brandon, and he always takes the guys that I have, but I always have a backup. So my backup, which is going to be very hot take, controversial, which Brandon loves, is Sebastian Cossa.
Okay.
I wish I could see Brandon's face when I said that.
We'll get Brandon's take on it, because that's where I was going next. I was going to the goalies next, because the goalie situation has intrigued me as a whole with the acquisition of Gibson at the Red Wings level. And obviously they've got, it seems like everybody that we talk to, there's not only Cossa, Augustine, the young goalies in the system are playing well, including some of the other ones that the Griffins acquired. So is that a hot take to you, Brandon? Did he singe your eyebrows with that one?
He did not, actually, because I think we're all in agreement at this point that Kossa's done everything right to get that opportunity. Obviously, the spot in the roster has to open up in Detroit for him to be able to go. But what it comes down to is Grand Rapids is very fortunate to have the goaltenders it has. You have Sebastian Cossa putting up unreal numbers at a consistent level, and that was the biggest piece of his game that everyone wanted to see improve, was consistency. But then you also have guys like Michael Postava, who unfortunately has been out with injury for a little while now, on the up and up, should be back in the backup role by the time Christmas breaks over. And then you've had Carter Gylander, who was a Red Wings draft pick, spent a lot of time in the ECHL, called up this season, and has been unreal for this Griffins team. It seems like he gets better and better every game, even posting that 5-0 shutout win Sunday night. So if Cossa does get that call to Detroit, Grand Rapids seems to be in very, very good and capable hands.
It finally feels like they've, and this had to be what they were going for with the Gibson move in general, but they've kind of right-sized the goalie situation. It felt like they were just throwing a lot of bodies at it lately, or a rotation with it late in the season last year at the Red Wings level. And then you knew you had Cossa coming, but when you knew you had Augustine coming, but when these guys are hopefully developing into NHL level goalies, but they're young, they're developing, and you got to give them time, because you can't put them up to the main level too quick. Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We want to be careful with Augustine, because he's not signed. He's in our system, but he's not signed. So until he's signed, he's not here. And that's kind of how I have to run this based off of previous players that we had drafted, right? So a lot of hype around Trey. Love him. Want to see him here, but I kind of have to block him out of my mind that he's not.
So what do you think the holdup is there? They're just waiting for some more development, or to clear a spot for him, or what are they waiting on for him?
So he's still at Michigan State,
right?
Wants to win the Natty at Michigan State. So that was a big gearing point of him coming back. The other thing is the NIL. He makes quite a bit of money with Michigan State. So the other aspect of it is he's not going to come here to back up Cossa. He's not going to play third role against him or Postava. So they have to have a clear road for him, like a roadmap of how he's going to get to the NHL, how it's going to make sense for him, and go that route. I think after this year, we could see, if Cossa could graduate, right? He's putting up the numbers that he has. He should be in the NHL next year. He should be getting games this year, which would clear a spot for. We got Postava for next year as well. So it's 2 years, and then you could bring Trey up to be either starter, backup with Posty.
Well, that's where I see the kind of the right size for the goalies, because you've got two veteran goalies, one of the oldest goalies in the NHL right now, in Cam Talbot. He's playing well for his age, I would say. I think all of us would probably say that. But he, how many many games does he have left? How many seasons does he have left? You got to think he's the next one to go. And between the two of them, maybe some of those injury games get thrown to Kosa this year. Then you lose Talbot maybe next year. And now you've got Gibson and Kosa, and then you've cleared the spot at the Griffins. That's kind of how I always saw the progression. Obviously, a lot of things have to happen. There's moving pieces there.
Yeah, a ton of things have to happen. And then, like Brandon said, he said Carter Geilander, like, this guy's playing phenomenal too. So it's like, and he's been in the organization the longest. And so it's like, now he's getting his chance in the AHL. So, we've got like I said, we have Posty for two seasons, and it might force a trade to be able to clear a spot for somebody. So, I mean, that could potentially happen as well.
I want to talk about that after the break here, because I feel like that's the next subject matter, because there's obviously some changes that need to be made, but I'm curious what trades you kind of have in mind. So we'll come back with Brandon and Nick of Hockeytown West. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Hard to project trades, and I'm not necessarily asking for that. But as we head into what will be the trade deadline season here coming up, that's the piece I wonder with a lot of these teams, because if you look across the Detroit market, that's the teams are kind of in a similar spot where there's a lot of young guys, there's a lot of depth, whether you're talking the Tigers, the Pistons, the Red Wings. And so then it's always the decision, do we wait for some development from these young pieces that are showing a lot of development, a lot of potential, or do we consolidate some of the pieces? Because you're talking about kind of the veteran rotation in Grand Rapids, where we're talking about shuffling players back and forth to Detroit. Do you guys see them trying to make in any sort of moves to consolidate a few of these young pieces and take, because you got to think a big swing is coming at some point, right, via free agency, via trade, or maybe they just wait for the development. I'm kind of one that I like to develop the young core, and I don't necessarily need to consolidate the pieces, but a lot of fans would say, hey, let's consolidate these pieces and see what we can do. What do you think, Nick? You're pondering here in studio.
Yeah, it's hard to say, because like, you look at this team, and before the season, like we're looking at it, we're like, we're gonna have ASP, we're gonna have Emmett Finney, we're gonna have FBN, we're gonna have Nate Danielson, then we got AMO, Carter's coming back, and then like we don't have any of those guys, right? Like Carter's out with an injury, Amo's out with an injury. You got guys that are up in Detroit, and then it's got like Hull and Gus are driving from Detroit and back every day. So you're like, on the personal side, you look at it, you're like, these guys can't continue to drive back and forth. So you would expect them to, find an NHL team to go be with, and that Steve's trying to work the phones and trying to trade them to just do right by the person, right? So you think that happens? Possibly. It's hard. We just let Beargrid through waivers, and we lost him to St. Louis, doing very well right now. You look at some of the forwards of trying to trade those. You got some young pieces here that you've got enough data on, so you could try to move those that are still young and just might need a change of scenery, like Johnny Burgers. So it's tough to say like what's out there, what's available, and try not to mess too much with the chemistry of this team, because we think too is when we look back towards the spring, you're going to have college ending, you're going to have the international side is going to be ending as well that season. And so those guys will come over here to Grand Rapids, and then they add into the chemistry and they add into the flow of the team. And so it's, you might lose somebody here, but then they pick up here. But like everybody's really picking up the pieces. Like Brandon said, like we're losing guys to Detroit, and it doesn't matter. Like we're continually going through this, and everybody's carrying their weight and then some. To continue this crazy record that we're on.
That's the other piece is the culture piece, because you want to make sure to protect that locker room culture. They clearly have, it seems like a pretty decent one at both levels, but you still have to upgrade the team. And then you had the whole thing last year at the Red Wings level that they weren't aggressive. There was some internal talk from Larkin and others that, maybe they did want to make a move. We've had some people on the show saying, well, hey, if you make a move, that might help motivate them a little bit. It seems like you got something else to say here, Nick.
Well, the trade that just happened was Quinn Hughes, right? Everybody wanted Quinn Hughes, and then we're looking to give up Simon Edvinsson, we're looking to give up Marco Kasper, Nate Danielson, and then Carter Bear. And so then it just creates too many holes. Like Quinn Hughes fills one position. You just saw this with Toronto when Mitch Marner got traded to Vegas. They replaced him with 4 players, and that didn't work out. You can't replace 4 players with 1 player. It doesn't work that way. The way these teams are constructed. So it's hard to like, you want to make a big fish. You want to get that big trade. But it's like when we traded for Alex DeBrincat, we didn't give up a whole lot of pieces there. And he's performed exceptionally well.
He's been great.
Yeah. So you lost Donovan Sobrego. You lost, I believe, a 4th round pick. And then I think there was another piece involved too. But it didn't create a lot of holes for us. And it's paid off really well. So like a big piece like Quinn Hughes, I get it. It's a Norris Trophy winner, but it just creates too many holes down the center. And then we're back in the position we're in again.
It seems like you want to consolidate the pieces that are a little bit duplicative or that you would get rid of otherwise. You're talking about Berggren, getting rid of him. You know, you want to ideally try to consolidate those and make a trade rather than lose them through waivers. Obviously, they had to do it there. What do you think about this conversation, Brandon? I imagine you might agree with Nick since you guys talk a lot, but it's always a tough call because people are starting to get a little uptight with Steve Yzerman, with the development, with the fact that it's been kind of a long timeline. But you can also, I mean, you guys see the Griffins more than anybody else. You see these young guys. You can see that there's a lot of young guys in the pipeline that could be coming and filling some of these bigger roles at the main roster.
Yeah, I mean, there's all the talk of, is the Yzer plan, is it working? And you look at the Red Wings, they're currently in a playoff spot. You look at the Griffins on a historic start. You even go down to Toledo being a great team, too, as well, being a great team to pull players from. So the plan is working. It's just taking longer than I think fans wanted to. I think on the trade side of things, I think what you might see happen, and I think this is maybe the piece they need to do, is Cam Talbot's on an expiring deal. A team that is wanting to go into the playoffs might take him, opening up that door for Kosa. And if the Wings still make the playoffs after they call up Kosa, great. That's fantastic. That's exactly what you would hope would happen. And I think on the other end, you might make a move to shore up the defensive side a little in Detroit. I don't see this team making dramatic, gigantic moves, and I'm sure fans are not going to love to hear that. But at the same time, they've got a lot of good pieces in the right place, and they're playing really well right now. And if they consistently do that, I don't think you would need to change. I think you rely on that development and that youth that still could come up. I mean, you look at the grand scheme of things. When Carter Mazur's back, if he can stay healthy, he'll probably end up in Detroit again. You look at Amadeus Lombardi, if he can come back and stay healthy, he's probably going to get a shot in Detroit. I'd argue if he was, not injured right now, he might have gotten the call up over John Leonard. But at the same time, I think the pieces are all falling into place. The plan is kind of working itself out here, and what you're seeing is just something historic that is going to help the organization for years to come.
Well, that's why we like to talk to you guys about this stuff, because you guys kind of see the future to a degree when you see the Griffins and you watch them more so maybe even than the Red Wings. We do the same thing with the Tigers. We follow a lot of the minor leagues. We follow a lot of the single A, double A, triple A, and same thing. We try to check in with the G League, because I had a lot of people texting me about Dennis Jenkins, who came out of nowhere seemingly and kind of took the NBA by storm. They said, well, where did this guy come from? Well, he came from the G League. That's the same case with some of these guys, whereas I hadn't necessarily heard of an Emmett Finney before this season, before he started to get a lot of talk in camp, but you guys had seen him play. Not that you could have foresaw that rise, but you'd seen him play. You'd seen a lot of these young guys play. So yeah, patience is tough for fans, but it does pay off, because it just changes the value of what you're doing at the major league level. Because like Nick said, if you're paying all of that to consolidate for one piece, now you're having to develop a lot of other pieces. Whereas if you can develop a lot of those pieces into something that is a piece in itself, a piece that you can trade away, a piece that will draw somebody in, having a young core that would appeal to free agents to come there, because that's the next step. If they are making the playoffs, you've been able to pull in a Kane. Granted, it was with the injury issues, but you've been able to pull in some of these free agents. The level of free agents that you can pull in and the level of talent that you can attract goes up when you have an attractive core that people want to go play with.
I think too, though, is that you get people that are impatient. I get it. And you look at Holland's last draft, we don't have any of those players in the system right now. They're not in Detroit's organization at all. Steve's first draft, we have 7 players from that draft. So drafting is a huge aspect of it. And we've been drafting very well in the last few years. And then we're right there, right on the edge, right, of getting to the playoffs, and people want to make a big move. And then what happens? If it doesn't work out, you're now set back 2-3 years because you got to replenish the cabinet. I just don't feel that we're at the position yet to be able to trade away the pieces we have. Now give it to maybe 3 years, and we might have those spots where it's like, okay, we have so many centers now. We could trade one of these. We could trade this guy that's maybe on edge. Maybe he could be something, but we don't know yet. But we could take a risk there, right? But we just can't clean out the cabinet. We're just finally getting to the point where it's like we've got backups, we've got extras, we've got enough in the pipeline. We're just not there yet, I think.
This is a baseball analogy, but if you swing for a home run, you're more likely to strike out. If you try to consolidate and get those pieces together rather than, kind of develop these players and make sure you get a little bit, you get on base, you get a solid hit. So yeah, I like that strategy in general, but I'm patient and not everybody is, but we appreciate you guys joining the show here. Want to make sure to plug the podcast because everybody should be listening to the podcast. There's a lot of great Griffin stuff. They talk some wings, and they've got a lot of good stuff here for people in the Grand Rapids area. So make sure to tell the people where they can follow you guys here.
Yeah, you can follow us anywhere you get podcasts at Hockeytown West Podcast, or if you want to follow us on the social pages too, it's at Hockeytown W Pod. Post-game interviews when the teams play at home, post highlights throughout all the games and news and updates and all the fun stuff you could want when it comes to these guys. And just want to say thank you again for having us on. It was a great time. Yeah,
I appreciate you guys coming on, and we'll look forward to having you back on as the season progresses here. We'll have a lot more to talk about. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you coming in.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have you guys back, and we'll have more Griffins coverage as we go on. But we're going to switch to the Spartans after the break. We're going to bring on Chris Solari, and he's going to talk to us about what's going on the football and basketball side of things for Michigan State. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We had him on just before the coaching change. He's known to most as Chris Solari, but on the show he's C Solari because soon he's going to be a symbol. We got to make that into it. I don't have any artistry, so I can't make you into a symbol, Chris. I'm going to have to outsource that. But he does great work for the Detroit Free Press, and we want to have him on to talk both things because Jeff and I, my producer and I, were talking about the Lions in the break, and that's going to be one of the main conversations. But one of the things that I want to remind people is that we've got a lot of other teams playing well in the local markets, and Michigan State basketball is one of them. Plus, we got to talk about the coaching change, because it seems like when we talked to you the last time, it seemed like we thought, and I want to get your take on this, it seemed like we thought there wasn't going to be any movement, that they were going to stick with Smith at that point. They would have put themselves into the coaching carousel late, but then that's exactly what they did. A couple weeks after your last appearance, they decided to move on from Smith. They brought in Fitzgerald. So I have to imagine they had kind of identified that. They had worked on some of the funding pieces, and they decided to move on, because you did a great job of highlighting kind of the difficulties in moving on with the amount of money that they have out here for these various coaches, and then adding to it with Smith. But they apparently decided to pull the trigger here.
Yeah, and I think they feel confident that they'll figure out the situation with Mel Tucker. And I do think that, and I was told from a couple people that they were not going to move on unless it was Fitzgerald, unless Fitzgerald agreed to the deal. And I know that from a contractual standpoint, because he's in some ways in an image repair mode, if you will, and partly because he was able to get a significant settlement with the lawsuit for wrongful termination from Northwestern, and a lot of those things. There was, and the fact that he was also I don't want to say unemployed, but he was not currently employed at that moment. So Michigan State didn't have to pay a buyout to someone else either. So I think a lot of those factors came into play. I think there was a lot of calculus that went into that. And I think when you go back and if you go listen to the press conference when Fitzgerald was announced as the head coach, everything moved pretty quickly right after the season. You know, Jonathan Smith and Michigan State wins the last game against Maryland at Ford Field on Saturday. They announce on Sunday that he's no longer going to be the coach. And then the quick move pivot to Fitzgerald that same night, and then that the official move was made that Monday. So I mean, but in the press conference, I think you listen to President Kevin Guskowitz, Tom Izzo, and Jay Batt, and also I think listening to Pat Fitzgerald, there's a lot of people that really like Jonathan Smith. I don't think just as a person, and I think that's the first and foremost thing that is there, but I think a lot of people like him as a football coach, and I think he's going to find a good landing spot at some point. I just don't think this was a good fit for him for a number of reasons, and the number of reasons I think ultimately comes down to, in this day and age, what the donors want. And when Fitzgerald, it was maybe not long before the game against Maryland that you started hearing some rumblings that Fitzgerald might be interested, and he was on my short list of candidates for them if they were going to move on. I think it all came together, and I think the fact that Fitzgerald and him and Smith have been friendly and know each other fairly well through the coaching ranks. I think it was an interesting press conference, to say the least, but I do the mold a little closer to regional level that Michigan State is more accustomed to than what Jonathan Smith brought.
It's about as smooth of a transition as you could have under the circumstances, I think, and that's the inclination I've gotten. I've got some people planned to be on the show that are a little bit closer to Smith and know him fairly well, and I think we'll say the same things because, like you said, we really haven't heard much in the form of negative. It was just maybe not the best match for the team, and you've been around longer than I have. You've been on the beat for a long time. It's the idea that some teams need something different. They need a change. If you have a more of a calm coach, sometimes you need somebody with a little bit more intensity. If you have more of a defensive coach, you need an offensive coach. Whatever it is, there's usually a kickback effect for some of these coaching changes, either at the collegiate or pro level. And that seemed to be what happened here. Fitzgerald's got some intensity, and you hit on it. I mean, man, he rallied the donor base and the fan base very quickly, and it went from kind of a general malaise in the fan base and the donor base to now we're ready to rock and roll, and he's made some good hires so far. You've been highlighting them in your articles, and he seems to have gotten momentum quickly because the other part of the exchange, sure, they made a smooth exchange. They got him in there quickly, but his back was kind of against the wall with the new timing of everything. He had to work on retaining players. He had to work on the hires. Now he's got to be headed into the transfer portal. He's starting basically on. He has to be on right away, which is why he was hoarse for said press conference.
Yeah, and I think some of what you see as well, I mean, I think you need to look at the moves that he has made with this staff right out of the gate. He kept Joe Rossi, who I think you could see the corner was turned a little bit this year, especially late in the season. And, he's a guy that's got Big Ten experience, and Fitzgerald knew him well for a number of reasons, but also because he was at Minnesota at the same time that Fitzgerald was at Northwestern. So he's game planned against them, and he understands the kind of defense that Rossi runs, which I think is critical. And then you start looking through some of the guys that he's kept on the staff. He kept Rossi. He kept James Adams, who Rossi brought in this year to work with the safeties. He kept Brian Wozniak, who came over with Smith and his staff, and his only coaching jobs have been under Smith at Oregon State and Michigan State. But Wozniak is an Ohio guy that played at Wisconsin, so he understands the Big Ten as well. He understands the recruiting landscape in particular, and keeps them in Ohio, and keeps Courtney Hawkins, who is a guy that, when you look at what Michigan State did to repair some of the bridges in the state of Michigan. I mean, Hawkins was a carryover from Mel Tucker's staff, the Smith staff, and now onto his third coach, because he knows the state of Michigan. And I think that those are all things that you look at, and a guy like Kurt Richardson, who's a little behind the scenes guy, but players love him. He's a Lansing guy, has NFL ties. So I think there's a lot of things when you see this, and you say, okay, Smith had the ship moving in the right direction. It just might not have been as quickly as, especially in this era, what people wanted. And then you pivot to what else that Fitzgerald has done. He goes out and brings home Max Bullough, which I think is an energizing move for a lot of people. And I think that's going to be a fascinating dynamic to watch him kind of serve under Rossi and kind of grow into that as a young coach to a co-defensive coordinator role. And you got a lot of fire between those three guys. I mean, Rossi was a former defensive lineman. Fitzgerald's a former linebacker. Bullough's a former linebacker. So all those guys together bring some energy. And I think it's going to be interesting, too, with the reports of Nick Sheridan coming in. Again, another guy that's worked in the Big Ten at Indiana and played at Michigan. His dad coached at Michigan State under Nick Saban. There's a lot of familiarity with the Big Ten. You can tell that this is the blueprint that Fitzgerald is bringing is getting guys who know and understand the Big Ten and how to win in the Big Ten.
And some pretty good resumes, especially for young guys. I think they played that Bullough situation perfectly because he seemed to be kind of a tweener candidate to a degree. I know there was some inclination that they might keep Rossi as they did. There was also the buyout there that you would have had to deal with. Plus, I think, like you said, they were turning a little bit of a corner. There were a lot of people that were pretty happy with him, but I think there were a lot of people that wanted to bring Bullough back. But he had a decent role there at Notre Dame. He was kind of ascending, so I wasn't sure if they would be able to pull him back. But between naming him the co-defensive coordinator and, like you said, being able to learn under a more experienced guy, they're bringing in some talent that were held pretty good positions. He was working his way up at Notre Dame, just got hired there. Sheridan was at Alabama. You know, these are guys that were ascending, but we're still wanting to work on Fitzgerald's staff, which I think is a good sign for the team.
Yeah, guys that are in their 30s. I mean, so they're young coaches on the come up, which I think is big for especially Sheridan and Bullough. And I do think that you got to look at the Midwest roots of these guys. You know, guys, I think Keith Boniface, who's the running back coach, he just took a position at Cal. He's a West Coast guy. He's from Oakland. Real good guy. And I think he's going to find a great landing spot at Cal that near his hometown. I think that's, you know, there's a lot to be said about that. There's a lot to be said about Jonathan Smith and really a lot of his coaches having been West Coast guys. I think that when that hire was made, you have to remember that Oregon State was losing its conference. It was in no man's land. And I think it, you know, when your coaches in that respect, you got to find the what you think is going to be a stable fit. But sometimes when you make that far of a move, it dramatically, and a lot of those guys hadn't coached west of or coached east of the Mississippi River, there's a culture shift. And I think that there was some, at least with some of the staff members, and maybe even with Smith a little bit as well. I just think that there was not necessarily an overwhelming, what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't want to say fit, but it was a tough adjustment. Let's put it that way. And I think that these guys will probably find their way back to there. Blue Adams is a guy that he saw where he went. He landed at Florida State. He was the secondary coach. He's a guy that's from South Florida. So, I mean, I think that, you know, some of this may be the machinations of what you're seeing in college football playing out where guys want to be closer to home and places that they know. And I think that's what Fitzgerald's tapping into with the guys that he's bringing into his staff.
There is something to the Midwest ties as you're talking about, but it's just funny. It's got to be funny to you, Chris, to talk about Midwest ties for a conference that now stretches to the West Coast.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's going to be the real interesting thing here is that, you know, you almost have to have some ties to each of the coasts. You know, I think you need to have some feelers out. And I think Michigan State in the last few years and not just in football, but also in basketball, they've done a good job of recruiting the DMV area in Maryland and Virginia. I mean, a guy like Jordan Hall comes in and really is a difference maker, and that's one of those key pieces that they're going to want to keep. I think you also, though, have to stay at home, and it's going to be interesting to me to see what Nick Marsh does. I know he's in the portal. I know that, you know, he's going to be looking and exploring, but I think that they're also in keeping Courtney Hawkins. That to me makes me think that they're going to make a hard push to keep Nick Marsh because he's a playmaker. And that's something that Nick Sheridan at Alabama has done. When Ryan Grubb took over and he had a long relationship with Kalen DeBoer all the way back to their time in Sioux Falls. He took 1 year and went and ran the offense with the Seahawks and then went to Alabama. So kind of bumped Nick Sheridan out of the OC role from the first year there. But Sheridan got a chance to work with another former Michigan State guy in Jeremy Bernard, who was an electric playmaker. And, those are the kind of guys that you need in the passing game. And I think they know that Marsh is one of those guys that is maybe not replaceable. But, again, you're also talking about what's the monetary aspect of it. I know his mom was at one of the basketball games recently, and I know that she has moved to Lansing. So it does mean a little bit of where you are and where your feet are. So that's, I think, a situation to kind of watch here in the next few weeks.
That'll be a big one. I'm glad you touched on that because I was curious about, because obviously entering the transfer portal is one thing, but actually moving is another. He can still recommit to Michigan State. But Chris, you always do this to me. You're too good on football, so then we can't transition to basketball. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk about this basketball team because they have been good to start the season, and this is a classic Izzo team to me. So I want to get your takes on the basketball team here in the second segment. So we'll come back with Chris Solari of the Detroit Free Press. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
From the Scully Statewide Moving Studios.
Country with a Twist. Jethro FM. 1530 AM. WYGR Wyoming Grand Rapids. 94.9 FM Grand Rapids. 99.5 FM Lowell. And Jethro South. 980 AM WAKV Otsego Plainwell. 98.9 FM Otsego. And 105.1 FM Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
On the football team as usual, but we got to talk some hoops here, Chris, because this is a classic Izzo team to me. They obviously lost Richardson to the draft last year, but they have some veterans. They have some guys that have been around the program for a while. That's an Izzo staple in an era where we have a lot of transfer portal and NIL stuff on the basketball side too. So I'm curious to get your feel for them here. They just had the long running rivalry with Oakland. I love the sweaters. Can you get a sweater like that? Can we get you a sweater? I want to get you a sweater like that.
I wish. Those are custom made. Izzo knows someone out in the West Michigan area near his beach home that has a company based around Chicago that hooked him and Lupe up with those. I think Lupe is actually the one who put the thing together. And, I mean, those were glorious. I mean, that was a glorious. I didn't know what to expect. And I especially knowing that Izzo, the first year he wore basically the Buddy the Elf costume sweater and took a little bit of heat on it. But I think he's tapped into it and leaned into it a little bit more here the last few years. And, it certainly has become an interesting little tradition. But, yeah, I mean, this is, that was kind of the sidelight to me. I mean, I think a lot of people, there were about 15,000. It was a very good crowd down at Little Caesars. And I thought Michigan State played a very good game considering. And I say that because I think this is the time of the year when Izzo, historically and especially since the Penn State game, has really been altering and moving around his lineup to kind of create some adversity. And he loves to do that, to find out how guys respond, find out how guys respond to maybe getting less minutes, getting more minutes, getting put in different roles. And then I think when you get out of they got a game on the 29th against Cornell. They'd already played Colgate, which is going to be a very confusing couple times. But I think when they play the Cornell game, I think you may see a little more tinkering and a little more shaping towards what you're going to see on January 2nd when they have to go play a really tough road game in a really tough environment at Nebraska. And that's I think what he's looked towards since that Penn State game is, okay, you got through the major games in your non-conference schedule. You beat Kentucky, you beat Arkansas, you beat North Carolina, and you took Duke to the limit. Now you need to find out what is real and how much better can you get.
That's interesting to think of it in that way. We know that he schedules a lot of adversity. You just read off a lot of the top teams that they played thus far. But I didn't think of that from a roster standpoint too, but he does do that. Especially, they do have some young guys on this team. That's one reason for hope, because he's got a veteran-laden team, which is usually better for Izzo, but he's also got some young guys that you feel like could get better as the season goes on, because they are getting significant minutes. You could see some growth from, say, a Scott. Ugochukwu has looked good in limited time. McCullough has been back and forth, but he's looked decent. He's trying those guys out to see who's going to have the medal going forward as the Big Ten season picks up, because you needed the tough out of conference schedule, because the Big Ten's going to be very tough seemingly this year, as it normally is.
Yeah, and Ugochukwu has been a big pickup, and he was kind of almost an afterthought in this cycle as a late portal addition. But he's been kind of the pivot point in a lot of these moves, because he brought him in to back up Jeremy Fears, and, what that meant would be how many minutes, right? I mean, the ideal thing is you get Fears playing 30 to 32 minutes a game. The more ideal thing would be get him to play more, but I think he's started to see a little bit that, Fears is, with the after the shooting is still kind of working that back to get to that point. And, he wants to keep him fresh while also playing at a high level. And Ugochukwu had been backing him up at point guard. Well, he moves him in at the 2 guard at Penn State. And that disrupts the rotation from what he had done for the first 8 games or so through the Duke game. And Ugochukwu responded. He had a big game at Penn State, hit 5 threes. I think he scored 23 in that game. Really helped carry them in a tough game, but because he moved to the 2 and spent most of his time there and a little bit of time at the 1, that meant you have to move the Harvard transfer, Doug Wojcik's kid, Denim Wojcik, in as the backup point guard, and that that's a little shaky. He was brought in kind of just as a roster filler to kind of get an extra body there for a backup point guard in case of injuries. He's got Ivy League experience, Division I experience, but you saw again in that Penn State game, when it comes to playing against the higher level of competition, maybe he's not there. Maybe he's more of a role guy. Maybe you need him for, 2 minutes before and after a timeout or something like that, or at the end of the half in foul trouble. I think that was one of those things. This segment is important for Izzo, for this roster, is who can I count on in case there is an injury? And I do think that you'll eventually see Ugochukwu move back a little bit more towards the 1, especially with the emergence of Jordan Scott. I think he's got the length and size and defensive capability that none of the other guys at the 2 guard have. I mean, Kurt Tang is a guy, and Trey Ford, that they're 2 guys that are 6'4", that are not necessarily the same kind of defenders that Izzo has seen with Jordan Scott as a freshman. And I think Cam Ward had a little bit of a wrist injury, so he's kind of working his way back a little bit. So you've seen Jesse McCullough, as you mentioned, getting some of those minutes and showing that he's going to be a force. He redshirted last year. He's in his first year of eligibility, basically playing wise, and has shown he can stretch the floor a little bit from outside. He can bang inside. He's going to still need to get tougher and stronger. But this is the time of the year that Izzo needs and wants to find those things out.
And he is finding some good pieces, like you said. McCullough, he's shown the ability to be a stretch big, which will be helpful. Obviously, they've got a great big man rotation. We haven't even mentioned, the 3 main kind of engines of this team, along with Fears being Carr, Kohler, and Cooper. There's got to be a nickname in there, Chris. We've got some alliteration. I know they don't all start with a C, but I feel like there's got to be a nickname for those guys.
The big 3 C's.
Yeah, exactly.
But I listen, and you can go to 4 C's and call it Jeremy Fears because he's the captain of the ship, man. I mean, all 4 of those guys are listed as captains, but this is Jeremy Fears' team. And I think what you've seen, even with all the things that Izzo's done and shaking up the lineup here since the Duke game and moving guys in and out, is this team is going to go as its best 4 players are in those 4 guys, those 4 veterans. That's why he kept that nucleus together. That's why that, the guys like Holloman, when they left, and Xavier Booker. Those were the ones that kind of fell by the wayside because Izzo likes that group of four guys. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see just how much better the two guys that I think that really still have a long way to go to reach their ceiling are Fears and Carr. Carr had a tough start at the outset of the Oakland game, but really for the first time this season, we saw him turn it on a little bit. He played a little more and Fears, he's still up and down with his offensive game. They're going to need more from him on the offensive side. That doesn't mean scoring 20 a night. That doesn't mean he's a ball distributor first and foremost, but he's got to be able to show that he can score, on the drive and really a couple jumpers here and there to force defenses out on him so he can create when he penetrates.
That's a great point because he's such a prolific passer. Fears is that he can go to that pretty much any time. He's got Carr and Cooper to lob to. Kohler's been a nice inside outside guy, but yeah, if you can get that defense stretched a little bit and not as compressed with those big guys who can stretch the floor themselves, then you're opening things up for yourself essentially. It's nice that he's that unselfish, but he's a rare player that you actually want him to shoot a little bit more.
Yeah, you got to get the open shot. I mean, there's a couple points where he's made some moves into the paint where he's trying to create. I mean, he's a master at creating contact, but I think sometimes when he gets into the paint, it's not always about trying to just finish it at the rim on a layup. Sometimes it's a little step back. I've seen that here and there with him where he'll get into the paint and take that hard plant and push back and hit that little floater in the paint. Mateen Cleaves used to do that all the time. And, I think the other thing, too, is like for him and Carr, it doesn't always have to be about what are you doing outside of the arc. Sometimes, and the same with Carson Cooper as well, it's you can create that spacing by hitting inside the arc. Whether it be Carr from elbow to elbow, and the same with Cooper. Cooper between the elbows and his little baseline jumpers, he doesn't have to step out behind the arc when you've got guys that are hitting. And I think that's the other thing, too, is this team has done a better job of shooting the three since that real rough 3-game start to the season. It kind of looked rough like last year, how bad they were from the arc. But they're shooting at about 40+% clip since those first 3 games. So that if you get Carr hitting 1 or 2 a game, if you get Fears hitting the open looks when defenses sag off them, then you put pressure on the defense. You put pressure on opposing defenses because they're not going to know how to stop you if you show you've got diversified weapons.
The outside shooting was a key last year. They could beat anybody when they were hitting from the outside, but like you said, it wasn't super consistent. Now it seems to be that way this year. They're a little bit more consistent without it, but it's nice that it's trending up. But it's a fun team to watch. We'll be following them, and we'll be having Chris back on to update as the season goes on here, hopefully with a deep tournament run for the Spartans fans. But we appreciate you joining the show. Appreciate all the knowledge on the football and basketball side. Be sure to tell people where they can follow you here, Chris.
Yeah, you can find my stuff at freep.com, and I'm all over the socials. Just look for my name, Chris Solari, at Chris Solari on X, and some on Blue Sky, and sometimes you'll find me just randomly floating in some of the random corners of the internet.
I thought you were going to say you could send like a carrier pigeon to get to you too. Podcast. There we go.
Find me at lsj.com. You can find me random places. So.
Just try to find him. He's going to be just a symbol, though. But by the time we're done with him, by the end of the season here, he's going to be just a symbol. We just have to have a symbol that encapsulates Chris Solari.
Right hieroglyphic.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, we appreciate it, Chris. It's great stuff as usual. Great to catch up with you, and we'll look forward to have you back on as the season progresses here.
Thanks, and have a great Christmas and a happy holidays the rest of the way here.
Thanks. Same to you. I hope the year finishes up well for you, and I guess we'll talk to you next year.
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris Solari. Great stuff as usual on the Spartans side of things. We're going to transition. We're going to stay in basketball, but we're going to transition to the Pistons here. We're going to have Sean Corp of Detroit Bad Boys on to talk about the Pistons here, because another team that's doing pretty well and top of the Eastern Conference, but not necessarily talked about that way on the national scene here. So we'll get Sean's takes on what's been happening there so far, and stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Because I mentioned this before the break when we were introducing the segment, Sean, but it's funny to me because I've seen every game this year, as you have, and you follow them pretty closely. Definitely are more knowledgeable than me on the Pistons, but it's funny to me because they're at the top of the Eastern Conference, but it's not. It doesn't feel like it to a degree when you hear them talked about, you hear national media, and I kind of like that positioning for them because they still feel it's a nice balance of being at the top but still being somewhat underrated.
Yeah, I guess they like that underdog mentality. It kind of fits their point of view. Even in the games they play and the games they win, within those 48 minutes, they look like a team that isn't supposed to win, and then they pull it out. So I think that's kind of why they go under the radar.
It's a bunch of guys that seem to have a chip on their shoulder for various reasons. Stewart has a boulder on his shoulder seemingly every time he plays. He's one of my favorite players in the NBA to watch, regardless of team. He just happens to be on the Pistons, but his development has been important. Duran's development has been important. I mean, it just seems like pretty much everybody has taken a step up. Plus, they had the unfortunate Malik Beasley situation where I think they were going to retain him if not for the gambling probe. And you fill in Robinson for him, and they just kind of keep rolling. That's seemed to have worked, and the depth on this team is incredible. I know at times it's kind of, I think some people are viewing it as working against them, but man, it's keeping legs fresh for a presumed playoff run, and it's nice to see, man, during that win streak, they were throwing lineups out there that would be difficult to foresee at the beginning of the season, and they were still winning with starting lineups that had Javonte Green and Paul Reed and a bunch of guys that we didn't think would necessarily see the light of day. Dennis Jenkins, of course, too.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing a young team that had talent, and even though they lost shooting, they lost some of that veteran leadership. They finally have a little bit of continuity, and it allowed a lot of defensive-minded young players to really thrive in the J.D. Bickerstaff season going into season 2. So, they won when all those injuries hit. They won based on just hustle and drive and not giving up and playing tenacious defense, and they just sort of willed themselves to victory. And that really has helped them throughout the whole season. When shots aren't falling, they're generating turnovers, they're generating transition looks, and they're just willing themselves to win by creating looks that they know they can make close to the basket. And, when you have Cade Cunningham to really put the nail in someone's coffin, who has so many ways he can score, that helps too.
Cade's ball movement has clearly been contagious for this team, because obviously Cade is one of the better passers in the league, one of the better players in the league, point guards in the league. But it's amazing to me how quickly the ball moves now when it's not in Cade's hands. Guys like Stewart and Duran and Thompson are getting that ball moving, where that you would traditionally think of that as maybe a weakness for big guys, but they've shown to be pretty versatile. Some of these other players on the team, and it's contagious. I like that about basketball in general, because I think either way, your star player being that way is a bit contagious. Either they're a bit more of a ball hog, and that becomes contagious, and then the ball's sticking everywhere, and it seems like one ball is not enough for five guys. With this team, you've got a selfless leader in Cade Cunningham, and he's keeping that ball moving, and everybody else is following his lead, and everybody's getting fed and getting involved as a result.
Yeah, and I think, you take direction from the leader, and Cade sets that tone. He doesn't get sped up. He doesn't panic. And I think that kind of permeates through the entire roster. They never stop believing that they can make something happen. And there are some good natural ball handlers on this team, good secondary playmakers, like, putting Jalen Duren in the high post and just letting him kind of move the ball around. Or Asar Thompson has sort of that added responsibility to his game this year to just, he can't really shoot right now, but he can make things happen. It's a roster full of guys who are empowered to make things happen, and they give back some effort. So things are happening all the time on both ends.
The rising tide seems to be lifting all of the proverbial boats in the Pistons camp. The only one that got a little bit left behind because of the injury last year, and then picking up the injury late in the preseason and camp this year, is Ivy. You can kind of tell he's pressing a little bit. It's like that contagion, if you will, that contagiousness of moving the ball and that team aspect. It's kind of gotten lost on him a little bit. You can see that he's pressing a little bit more, which you can't really blame him to a degree. He's trying to get back out there. He's trying to find his way back into this rotation. He's probably having flashbacks of being behind Killian Hayes. It's not the same situation, but it is a tough one because the potential's there. We saw how he played last year when he was healthy, but he's also trying to find his groove in a team that has already kind of found their groove, and he's effectively going through the beginning of his season right now.
Yeah, and it's tough for Ivy, especially because his burst is not all the way back. It's not even close to all the way back. He can't rely on his speed like he wants to, and he knows that. I think the team knows that. So sometimes he's too passive. He's just kind of waiting in the corner for a shot, and he's willing to take it. And sometimes when the ball is in his hands, because Bickerstaff kind of wants to run some offense through him, he doesn't have that same speed to know exactly how to operate, what he wants to do on the floor. So it's kind of getting him a little discombobulated. But that being said, I think, the Pistons can weather this storm. I think they're not a complete team, but they're good enough right now to let Ivy kind of play himself back into more of his full form. And, for all the focus on Ivy's offense and, where it's lacking or where he hasn't returned to form yet, his defensive effort has really picked up since, last year, certainly since 2 years ago. He's really buying into what Bickerstaff is selling on that end, and he's playing better individual defense and good team defense and really helping on that end of the floor so that his minutes are not, a total vacuum for the Pistons. They're still finding ways to be effective with Ivy on the floor, even if he's not being tasked to be that second star next to Cade Cunningham or the first star in a bench unit right now.
That's what's been nice about the development around him, because LeVert has developed into a secondary ball handler for them. Obviously, Jenkins had the rise there. They have other guys that they can go to, but you got to think that Ivy, along with some of the guys that are already developing, Thompson, you talked about Duren's development, Stewart's developed nicely. There still could be a difference between, hopefully especially with Ivy, but between how they're playing now versus how they're playing at the end of the season, because that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit flummoxed by the fact that they aren't really getting the recognition on the national level, because not only are they playing well, they're primarily a pretty young team, so you got to think that there could be some more growth by even the end of the season, let alone going into next season.
Yeah, I think they don't win by the standards of today's NBA because they don't really have shooting right now. And I think it's a fair criticism of the Pistons. I think they need to add shooting. I think adding shooting makes everything else just fall into place that much easier. They added Duncan Robinson to replace Beasley. They never really replaced Tim Hardaway Jr. Karis LeVert does a little bit of that, but he's not that sort of catch and shoot threat that Hardaway Jr. was. So that's something they can address, and it kind of helps everything make sense. But to your point, I think the national media, I think other teams don't really believe in the Pistons because they think it's a bit of a house of cards, because when the shots don't fall, a team's not supposed to be able to win. And the Pistons sometimes have good shooting nights, and on nights when the shot is not going down from deep, they're still finding ways to win because they know how to get to the rim, and they especially know how to play the kind of defense that creates easy offensive looks for themselves.
That's the key. Yeah, they're winning in multiple ways. I want to talk about the potential of consolidating some of these pieces, because we're talking about the depth, we're talking about adding shooting. So I'm wondering if you have your eyes on anybody, but we'll take a quick break and we'll talk about possible trades to kind of kick themselves up into the conversation a little bit more. But we'll return with Sean Corp of Detroit Bad Boys. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. I guess the Nasty Boys seems to be kind of catching on. That was going to be that's one of the conversations I've been having with folks is nickname related. It sounds like we're kind of trending towards the Nasty Boys, because the Bad Boys obviously is classic. That's what your outfit is named after. Then we had the Going to Work group. That just seemed a little wordy to me. And now we're back kind of echoing the original nickname with the Nasty Boys, it seems.
Yeah, I don't know where it'll end up, but I think if you're a team that has generated the need for a nickname, I think you're doing something right. So we'll see where it all lands, but things are looking good for Detroit.
Exactly. Well, and that's why I wanted to talk about it's funny how much trade conversation there's been for a team like this, but they're also in an advantageous position. Not only are they the top team, but they're also poised for some potential improvement, like we talked about in the first segment, and they have some pieces that you could potentially consolidate to put them over the top, because as was highlighted at the beginning of the season, the Eastern Conference is kind of wide open. You had the injuries to two of the most promising teams. The Celtics kind of cleared out a little bit, had a little bit of a fire sale. They lost Tatum for the majority, if not all, the year. That remains to be seen. Indiana loses Halliburton. And so you got a wide open conference that teams like the Magic and the Hawks and some others were trying to walk into. The Pistons have wandered into that conversation, even if they're not at the forefront. But I'm curious what you see happening with some of those pieces, because the other advantage of having all these players that are playing well, yes, you get to play into the depth, but you also can say, hey, we can take three or so pieces and consolidate it into a stretch four that's a shooter, or another shooter that can replace Tim Hardaway. Do you foresee anything like that? And do you have your eyes on anybody yet? I know it's a little early.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're in the conversation both because they're good and also because other teams and other teams' players' agents know that the Pistons have a good, financial setup. They're not burdened by money. They have a lot of young players, so they think they're a good sort of aggregation type team. So I think no matter how much legitimate interest the Pistons have in adding a piece, they'll be connected to every major name on the market, whether it's true or not. As far as what I think is probably likely to happen, I don't see them going for that. Certainly not the tier one superstar like Giannis, or even like the tier two big name players like Lauri Markkanen. I think to get Lauri Markkanen seemingly would cost all the Pistons, future assets plus a couple of young assets already on the roster. And I just don't think they think they're in a put me over the top type move yet. So I'm thinking more along the lines of, a version of the Dennis Schroeder trade from last year, but maybe slightly elevated. You mentioned Boston having already torn things down a little bit. They still have to trade another player to get under the luxury tax, which is what they're really interested in. So people expect them to make a move. So one of the guys that I think makes sense for the Pistons is a guy like Sam Hauser, who's 6'7", has spent his entire career shooting the three, and I feel like the Pistons would be willing to give up a real asset to get a player like that onto the roster. But it would just be those sort of borderline starter, six-men type shooter role players that I think the Pistons would be ideally suited to add.
That's a good one. I've heard that name rumored, and obviously they've had a couple clashes with the Celtics so far, and he doesn't really seem to be featured in the rotation like some of the other folks, and they are replete with shooters. So if they are trying to shed somebody, I could see him being on the outside looking in, and then that's another shooter to give you shooting depth beyond Duncan Robinson and some of the other guys. So yeah, I like that too, because they've clearly got a young core that's working, and I don't think it's worth. That's why I keep referencing the fact that they're at the top. I don't think it's necessarily worth upsetting the apple cart to get rid of multiple kind of heavy rotation players for a guy like Markkanen, although I can see the fit in the team, especially a stretch 4 type big man that Cade could use on that team. I don't necessarily think that swing is what they need. I like the idea of getting a Hauser, or like you said, multiple players. They're in the proverbial catbird seat again with the cap situation and where they are, pieces that could be valuable somewhere else, and not having really a lot of needs, but being able to add. Yeah, Schroeder was an underrated add last year. I mean, they basically got him for free, and he did play pretty well down the stretch. I think there's going to be players out there with the whole apron thing and with the new way of managing the salary cap. I think there's going to be some teams out there selling for various reasons.
Yeah, and I think one of the lessons learned by the Pistons from last season in the playoffs and just throughout the season is that they were a small team. So they had that shooting in Hardaway and Beasley, but effectively you're putting a lot of small guards on the floor together when you wanted shooting around Cade. So there's a lot of guards on the trade market, some guards that could shoot, like, Malik Monk, kind of, Anthony Simons, kind of, CJ McCollum. But they're like the 6'3" type guards, and I just don't think the Pistons are really into that this season. So, they added Duncan Robinson, who's a little taller. They added Karis LeVert, who was a little taller. I think they want size on the floor. So I would also anticipate them looking more at that forward position than the guard position if they're going to add bodies, because I think they want to keep Ivy, in the rotation, getting minutes if he's not part of the trade. I think that they don't want to discount that they have a steal in Dennis Jenkins. So I think it's that forward, the small forward, power forward position where they just want that extra lift.
What do you see them giving away? Because obviously Ivy's been rumored a lot, but like you said, I don't think this is necessarily a great time to trade him. His value's a little bit low. They've obviously got to make a decision on what to do with him moving forward as far as extending him and keeping him on the roster and where they value him and where he feels he's valued and all of those kinds of things. And you got to sign Duran and some other people after that down the pike. But where do you see them kind of consolidating some of those pieces? Because like you said, they do have some guards that they want to keep. So if you want to add in a small forward 3-4 kind of guy, where do you see them kind of consolidating the pieces, or is it just a future asset?
I think for the kind of quote unquote low level move like what it would take to get Hauser, they'd probably think about smaller assets like a Marcus Sasser plus future assets to make a move like that happen. I think that they're under no illusions that they can pay everyone indefinitely, though you see some of the young teams that are really, finding success in the NBA. They are very homegrown. They are just keeping the guys and building with the guys. So I don't want to discount that fact. But also you look at, how Cleveland became Cleveland. They had an opportunity that they knew was going to put them at a new tier when they were able to add Donovan Mitchell. So I think, they weren't searching for a Donovan Mitchell trade. They just found that one was available and they weren't afraid to say yes. And I think that's kind of where the Pistons are. They're not afraid of keeping some assets. They're not afraid of paying some guys. And if there is a move where all of those pieces can be bundled so you can find a true second star next to Cade, I think they would take that. But is Lauri Markkanen really a second star? I have my doubts. Giannis is too old, so I just don't see it at this trade deadline or this phase of this season to make that move.
And it's not a bad thing to wait on that swing, because like you said, with Cleveland, they waited till the right opportunity. There's no need for them to press. Everything is coming together. They've got that young core. They've got a team that people want to come to. They've been able to sign free agents. They've got a good culture, good general manager, good coach. There's really no need to push the chips all in, because you have a team that could make some noise in the playoffs. I'm not saying necessarily run all the way to the finals, but you do have a wide-ish open Eastern Conference that nobody has really claimed besides them. Presumably, they're up at the top. They're moving in the right direction. They've got a lot of depth, so you got to think they're going to have some fresh legs headed into the playoffs. So if you can just tweak the roster versus, we're going to sacrifice a decent amount of things from our future to make the big swing now, there's no need to swing and strike out. You can just go for a solid hit and try to move the team forward.
Yeah, and I think there's ways they can also add a body and add money without really hampering themselves long term, because, Tobias Harris could be involved in trade, or if he stayed, he would, come off the books after this season. I don't know if he's going to be around the team after this season. I think they kind of have Asar as the heir apparent at power forward, and that just puts more of an onus to add shooting at, the wing positions. Who knows what the future holds with Jaden Ivey, but, when these players sign their first big contracts after their rookie deals are up, they're not so big that they can't be traded. So even if you pay him now, you could move him later. So there's going to continue to be options and flexibility, and I think the Pistons, they've laid the foundation and they've built their identity on their defense, and I don't think that's going anywhere, no matter what trades could possibly be made, whether it's with Ivy or Duran or Tobias Harris or even Ron Holland or something like that. Like, you lose any one of those guys, you still have, this very stout defense that's really, what JB Bickerstaff is building.
The core is still there, even if you lose one of those pieces. So it's a great team to talk about. I'm excited for the future, both this year and beyond. Appreciate you coming on to cover them. We'll look forward to having you back on later in the season, maybe after the trade deadline, to see what the developments are. But be sure to tell the folks where they can follow you in the meantime here.
Yeah, you can follow all of the work of the entire staff of Detroit Bad Boys at DetroitBadBoys.com. We cover every game. We break down the news. We break down the players and their performance. We will certainly break down any trade rumors or any trades that actually, come to pass. So you can check us out there.
Be sure to check them out. It's great stuff, and we'll have more of the writers from Detroit Bad Boys. We'll have Brady Fredrickson on soon and some of the other folks. So be sure to follow them, and we appreciate you joining the show, Sean. We'll look forward to having you back on as the new year progresses, and I hope you have a happy holiday.
Happy holidays to you.
All right. Take care, Sean. Thanks to Sean Corp. Appreciate him covering the Pistons for us. And we're now back to the steady state in the studio here. We got Jeff in the studio. He's ready to go. Since we didn't get the open segment at the beginning, he wants to talk some Lions. We didn't talk any football yet, so we'll make sure to get that in before we close up the show. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Jeff Isaac in studio. He's excited to talk some Lions. We didn't get a chance to talk them at the beginning of the show here, and I think there's a couple interesting ways to go with it. Jeff was telling me about something that's kind of caught his eye. I was saying this on a previous show, Jeff, but for me, I'm getting a little weathered. I'm not one to jump to blaming the refs, because they have a difficult job. There's a lot of other opportunities to win the game. I didn't like that, again, the end of the game was dominated by referee calls. I think some of them were probably correct, but you had the whole thing with DK Metcalf in the crowd, and then he doesn't get kicked out of the game. He gets kicked out of 2 subsequent games, but still gets to finish the game in which he's committed the infraction. Then you've got the end of the game, which was an objectively exciting end to a game, but it just kind of felt like the air got taken out of it to a degree. But you had an interesting take about kind of how they ended up there at the end, because as the Lions were quick to point out, which is the right road to take, the high road to take, hey, it doesn't come down to the refs' calls. We could have done something earlier in the game. We didn't make the plays. We put it on ourselves, which is the kind of organization that they are. But you kind of have a certain direction that you haven't heard people go, but your take is that it kind of centers around one piece of this for the Lions.
Yeah, to me, it's Dan Campbell, and it's the problem that I keep seeing is he's still coaching this team like the team he had 3 years ago that were over 50% converting on 4th down. And you don't have the offensive line, especially the middle, the interior offensive line, they weren't running the ball yesterday. So if you're going to go for it on 4th down, everyone in Ford Field, fans and the opposing team, they know you're not running that ball. So now you've shortened that playbook. It's smaller, and not taking that field goal early and going for it on 4th down rather than taking the points again costs this man. And so instead of chasing a touchdown, you go down there, you kick the field goal, and you go up. And with the timeout in his back pocket, you can leave no time left on that clock, and you are not worried about the pass interference and all the other calls that they were worried about. You go down, you kick the field goal, and you win the game. And this is the problem that I'm having with Dan Campbell right now. His job is to put his players in a position to win the game. He's shorthanded. He's playing with guys that shouldn't have uniforms on. We're talking practice squad players, and yet he's not doing that. He's failing these players right now, and that's just what gets me the most.
There's 2 things that makes me think of from kind of the change. There's a lot of things that have changed since then, but one of the things that he had going for him at that time was he was able to catch people off guard with going for it on 4th down. Now everyone in that building is expecting him to go for it on 4th down. So you would almost think that in one universe, the Dan Campbell thing to do would be to throw people off. That's what he was doing initially. I think there was 2 reasons he got so aggressive. Is one, that's how he wanted to play. He wanted to put the game in his own hands, and he didn't have a kicker that he trusted. That was a big underrated thing when he was aggressive at the beginning, because they didn't have Jake Bates, they didn't have strong kicking, and everybody kind of centered around the decision. I think that was something that Dan didn't want to say in the press conferences and come out and say, hey, I trust my offense more than I do my kicker, because you can't do that for his confidence. But I think that was a huge factor in the origins of the aggression of Dan Campbell. But now both things have changed. Bates has been a little shakier than he was last year, but he's still been pretty solid. He's got a very strong leg, so you know you're good from beyond even 60. You can give it a shot with Bates. Plus, if he's sticking with, hey, I'm going to keep these people on their heels, then that decision is actually what you're talking about, Jeff, being a little bit more conservative.
Right, and taking the points, and then it just changes the whole dynamic of the end of that game, chasing that touchdown and especially when you're not running the ball and your defense is failing you. You can go back to the Giants game. Since the New York Giants game, the last 5 games, our defense is giving up over 31 points a game. Why put it in the defense hands to hang on? Even if we score a touchdown, kick the field goal, use that timeout to not have any time left on that clock. It's going back to taking the points. I understand he can't lose that aggressiveness, but he has to. To me, it's a whole thing of he's got to. Yeah, we had the talent and the trust 3 years ago. Absolutely, but you don't have that same team you had 3 years ago. You don't have the running game yesterday. Take the points. You're not, to me, are we going to say, oh, Dan Campbell's soften up? No, he's just playing smarter with what he has on the field.
You have to keep the edge, and that's the way to keep the edge at this point, to change what people know about him, because I remember this happening with Brandon Staley. He was really one of the major purveyors of this aggressive method, and he kind of did something that I think you're kind of alluding to, Jeff, that Dan Campbell could go down a similar path. He lost the thread of why he was so aggressive, and then it was like his whole identity just became aggressive, and he lost the ability to make the decision. You're ultimately making that decision every time. It's not a foregone conclusion. Every time you hit that crossroads, you have the ability to pick a particular Robert Frost-esque fork in the road there. And I think that has to be kept in mind, that it's not cast in stone. Like you said, we're not going to question his ability. If he adds some nuance back in, that's going to keep people on their heels and create some difference in how people view him. Because if you allow people to load up, if you allow a defense to load up and plan for one thing, that was one of the advantages of doing it the way they did, because they found an advantage of, hey, I can run on 3rd and 7 because I know I'm going for it on 4th down, but the other team doesn't. Now it's the reverse. The other team knows you're going for it on 4th down, so maybe you have a different play call on 3rd and 7 because you know, maybe I'll be a little bit more conservative and take the points so that we're not chasing double possessions at the end of the game like they have lately.
Right. Yep. That's true.
So yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I've always been a fan of him being aggressive, especially under the circumstances that he became aggressive. But I do agree with you that there's got to be nuance to it, because that's the only way you're going to keep people on their heels here. And it's not the same team. I think we've hit the tipping point on the defensive side of things that we kind of hit last year with. It was really the Buffalo game. They had lost Anzalone, and they were down to a lot of the practice squad guys as well. Losing both safeties, losing Arnold, we're seeing that, but they still got to play with what they've got. They've had a chance to win pretty much all these games that they've been in here recently.
And fans are not going to want to hear this, but I think one of the best things for this team is not making the playoffs, getting a weaker schedule next year, cleaning up, getting healthy, getting more picks in the draft, and doing it next year. And just going to it's not the end of the world. I'm so sick of this Super Bowl window thing. I'm so tired of it. Is their Super Bowl window? They've got a nucleus that they are going to compete for the next 5 years. He's got to win the draft next year. You have to deal with getting Hutchinson help. Just do it. Just do it already. Come on, Holmes. I believe in Holmes. A lot of people want Holmes' head.
That's crazy to me.
To me, it's insane. The impatience of this fan base is just, it boggles my mind with what we've been through my whole life.
Well, you hit it on the head there. You've been around like I have, and we've seen the different iterations of this team. This is way better. Yes, it's a down year compared to what we were hoping at the beginning of the season and all of that, but there's reason to be hopeful for the future. They've got some pieces that they'll carry forward. I think there are some ways to help Hutchinson next year. Holmes has traditionally drafted very well. We'll talk about this more in the offseason, but you can do subtle things like move Barnes into Anzalone's role, shed that salary, and then get a true pass rusher opposite Hutchinson. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. Everybody's going to focus on the Davenport side of things,
right?
But you also got that rush linebacker role that could factor in. But there's a lot of ways to improve this team. So I'm with Jeff as far as, hey, we've got a lot of good teams in this market. The Lions are still on an upward trajectory. Yes, it didn't work out this year. That's sometimes the way it goes. They still statistically can make the playoffs, but I'm with Jeff. Let's reboot. Let's take the good pieces from this year and let's move on. And we'll be talking about them a lot in the offseason here too. But want to take a quick second to thank our sponsors here: Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Encore Business Group, Jim Hagelin of JH Realty and Williams Chiropractic. We're actually going to be on the air on Christmas. We're going to do a Christmas show. We got a game on Christmas we'll be able to cover. We've got some guests coming on. I think Shane will come on via phone, and then we'll have Zach Moran on. So be sure to tune into that. Be sure to tune into the Sports Project Wednesday and Saturday. You might hear a familiar voice on Saturday, and then Sports Intel next week. So have a great week. Have a great Christmas. And if you want to, join us on Christmas, and we'll be here. But otherwise, we'll talk to you next week. And stay informed and stay vigilant. Have a great week.